The year is 48 CE. A 15-year-old girl steps across the threshold of the Palatine Palace. White silk clings to her slender form. Myrtle leaves rest upon her golden hair. The Senate rises to its feet. The crowd erupts in approval. The Emperor, 50 years old, his gait uneven, and his speech hesitant, reaches out and closes his hand around hers. His name already belongs to legend. Hers will come to mean something far darker, Valeria Messalina. Remember it. Rome would later try to erase it. In this moment, they expect her to be their salvation. The bloodstains from Caligula's murder have barely been scrubbed from the palace corridors. 4 years of chaos still linger in the air. Execution staged as entertainment, incest paraded as governance. A reign so deranged that his own guards slaughtered him in a tunnel beneath this very complex. Rome is desperate for order, morality, and heirs. They dress this girl as hope itself. Within a decade, she will turn this palace into something ancient writers struggle to describe without fear. Senators will become captives. Daughters of noble families will vanish into her chambers and return altered, silent, shattered, bound by secrets they will never speak aloud. She will host competitions that would scandalize even seasoned prostitutes. She will engineer blackmail networks so vast they would make modern intelligence services hesitate. She will openly wed another man while still Empress, in full daylight, with witnesses present, as though daring Rome to intervene. And when intervention finally comes, her statues will be torn down and smashed in the streets. Her name will be carved out of stone. Records will be altered to pretend she never lived. A ritual erasure. The destruction of memory itself. 2,000 years later, you are still here, still listening, because the things Rome tried hardest to wipe away are the very things that refuse to stay buried. So what happens when corruption is no longer a side effect of power, but power in its purest form? Rewind to 38 CE. The forum hums with life. Merchants shout their wares. Senators argue over grain shipments. Children weave between towering columns. Rome appears unbreakable, yet decay has already set in. Tiberius died 2 years earlier, bitter, paranoid, and isolated on Capri. Then came Caligula. 4 years of insanity. Public killings for sport. A horse elevated to the Senate. Senators forced to watch as their wives were violated at banquets. When the Praetorian Guard finally acted on January 24, 41 CE, 29 stab wounds ended his reign. His wife was slain beside him. Their infant daughter's skull smashed against a wall. Rome exhaled, then froze in fear. Who would rule next? They found him cowering behind a curtain. Claudius, the stammering uncle. The family disgrace with the limp and the drooping mouth. 50 years old. He never sought power and never expected it. The guards declared him emperor, not because he was capable, but because he was alive, and Rome needed someone in purple before the city tore itself apart. Claudius understood his position was fragile. He needed legitimacy immediately. An heir, a lineage. Proof the gods had not abandoned Rome. So he married Valeria Messalina, his third cousin, only 15 years old. A pedigree tracing back to Aeneas himself. A beauty poets could spend lifetimes describing pale skin, golden hair, features so flawless they seemed sculpted. She had been prepared for this role, taught obedience, instructed in virtue, trained to lower her gaze and speak softly. On parchment, she was ideal. The Senate agreed. The people celebrated. The empire once again seemed secure. But no one asked the most dangerous question of all. What happens when a child is dressed as a goddess? When she is placed in a palace where every door opens at her command, where senators kneel, where her husband is twice her age and terrified of losing control, when she is told her worth lies only in her womb and her purity, that she must be modest, submissive, chaste, a living emblem of virtue? When limitless power is handed to someone whose only instruction is never to use it? What happens when the distance between who she must appear to be and who she truly is becomes unbearable? Rome is about to learn. If this moment doesn't compel you to stay and witness what happens when authority collides with forbidden desire, then the lesson our ancestors paid for in blood is being missed. What follows is not merely scandal, it is the story of how empires rot from the bedroom long before they fall on the battlefield. The first 2 years unfold flawlessly. Messalina gives the emperor a daughter, Claudia Octavia, followed by a son, Britannicus, named for his father's victory in Britain. The Senate relaxes, the succession is secure. She appears at public ceremonies cloaked in modest dress, head covered, eyes lowered, every movement carefully crafted to project virtue, the ideal Roman wife. In public, she embodies everything Rome demands. In private, Rome has always divided its women into two roles, the matron and the courtesan, the sacred and the profane. One belongs to the household, raising children and guarding honor. The other inhabits the brothel, a place where men discard restraint as easily as clothing. The structure only functions because those roles never overlap. Messalina chooses to occupy both. The first rumors surface around 42 CE. A senator returns late from Ostia. His business ran long, and he is only in Rome for the night. On a whim, he wanders into the Suburra, the city's red light quarter, narrow alleys reeking of urine and sour wine, crowded apartment blocks where oil lamps flicker low, a place where a man can vanish into shadow. He selects a room and pays. The woman enters. A dark wig, heavy coals smeared around her eyes, perfume laid on too thick, myrrh and roses masking something unmistakably refined. She turns to face him. Their eyes meet. He recognizes her instantly. The Empress of Rome, not a rumor, not an imitation. Her. According to later accounts, written decades afterward and shaped by personal motives, yet informed by voices from inside the palace, this was not an isolated incident. Messalina is said to have taken the working name Lissa and become a regular at a brothel overseen by a woman named Sicula, not for profit, not from need, purely for exhilaration. Consider the psychology. Any client who failed to recognize her became an accidental participant. Any man who did recognize her became trapped, because who could he possibly report this to? She is not merely breaking social codes, she is turning the system's hypocrisy into a weapon. Roman virtue was always theatre. Senators kept mistresses. Generals frequented brothels. Married men slept with slaves. No one objected. But women of status, especially the Empress, were expected to exist beyond desire. Stone figures, wombs in silk, symbols, not people. Messalina looked at that cage and stepped straight through it. Before dawn, she would return. The wig removed, the cheap scent washed away. Imperial garments restored. She would attend the morning rites to the goddess of chastity, wearing the same calm expression she had worn the night before, as though nothing had occurred. But the brothel was only experimentation. The true machinery operated inside the palace itself. Picture the banquets. Rome's elite reclining on silk couches around low tables, gilded platters stacked with honey-glazed delicacies, wine pouring from jeweled cups, senators exchanging polite conversation, generals debating campaigns abroad, orderly, refined, civilized, until Messalina signals. The servants withdraw, doors are sealed, new guests are brought in, gladiators fresh from the arena, carrying the smells of sand, blood and sweat, actors from the stage, foreign captives, sometimes adolescent sons of noble families, summoned under the excuse of discussing their father's advancement. What followed is recorded with equal parts revulsion and fixation. And Barca the case and Pau a tabistav enforced spectacles, degrading competitions. Senators paired with rivals and ordered to amuse the Empress. Respectable women, married and terrified, coerced into humiliation while their husbands watch helplessly from across the room. Refusal is never permitted. A tribune declines her summons. Days later, his body drifts along the river. A noble attempts to depart early. His family estate is confiscated before the weekends. The warning spreads quickly. The Empress does not hear no. Then there is the contest. The story appears in ancient writings that were never meant to preserve scandal, yet could not ignore it. A rivalry between the Empress and a celebrated prostitute, not for coin, but for pride. Who could endure more partners in a single night? The number attributed to Messalina dwarfs the rest. The account is delivered with the detached precision of someone recording a natural phenomenon, tinged with horror and fascination. Truth or exaggeration can never be proven. But the tale endured because it captured something the Romans lacked words for. A woman using sexuality not as submission, but as command. Unable to define it, they turned it into legend. Yet legends do not arise from nothing. They preserve echoes of events people witnessed and could not erase from memory. The palace becomes a stage where power is measured through degradation. Senators arrive at dawn pleading for favor and leave long after nightfall, having done things they will never confess. Noble families send their daughters into the Empress's chambers and pray they return untouched. Most do, some do not. No one dares ask questions. By now, everyone understands how the system works. Messalina does not simply exercise authority, she harvests it slowly, one person at a time, weaving a web of shared guilt, so vast that no one can challenge her without destroying themselves. Every participant becomes captive. Every observer becomes complicit. She no longer needs approval from the Senate. she holds something far stronger. Their disgrace. Loyalty shifts. Shame endures. And throughout all of this, the emperor governs. Aqueducts rise. Courts are reorganized. The empire expands into Britain. A capable ruler long dismissed by his peers. Does he know what is happening? Of course he knows. Rome whispers. Senators murmur. His closest advisors plead for action. But what choice does he have? She is the mother of his heirs. To move against her is to confess humiliation before the entire empire. It risks civil war. It confirms every accusation that he was always too weak to command even his own household. So he does what powerful men throughout history have done when confronted with an unbearable reality. He turns away, buries himself in work, and convinces himself the decay can be ignored until the year 48 CE, a decade after their marriage, when everything finally collapses. It is autumn. Claudius is in Ostia overseeing Rome's grain supply, essential work, because the city lives on imported Egyptian wheat, and any interruption risks unrest. He is doing what he does best, acting as the steady administrator Rome depends on. Meanwhile, back in the capital, Messalina is marrying again, this time to Gaius Silius, consul designate, and one of the most powerful senators in Rome. Young, attractive, ambitious, everything Claudius is not. The detail that defies comprehension is that she does not conceal it. This is not a secret affair. It is a public wedding ceremony, complete with witnesses, contracts, and formal vows, all while she remains legally married to the emperor. Ancient accounts describe the scene with stunned clarity, the moment when Rome's elite watched the empress take another husband in full daylight, as if the laws of the empire no longer applied to her. Was it an attempted seizure of power? A calculated challenge? Did she assume the emperor was too weak to respond? Did Silius believe marriage could place him on the throne? Or had Messalina reached a point where the act of defiance itself was the reward, where the thrill came not from secrecy, but from daring Rome to intervene? Her thoughts are lost, only her actions remain, and Rome, compromised, exhausted, and deeply corrupt, finally reached its breaking point. Narcissus, the emperor's most trusted freedman, learns of the marriage first. He rushes to Ostia and finds Claudius poring over grain records. Imagine the words that had to be spoken. How does one tell an emperor that his wife has legally married another man? How does one convince him when the claim sounds absurd? But the confirmations keep arriving. Senators attest to it. Witnesses come forward now that someone is finally listening. Then comes the undeniable proof. The marriage contract exists. Signed, witnessed, lawful. Any trace of disbelief drains away. Picture the expression on his face. The ruler, long ridiculed. The stammering academic. The man who survived precisely because no one took him seriously. Publicly and legally humiliated, while ensuring the city did not starve. The anger that follows is not explosive. It is cold and irrevocable. He returns to Rome with the Praetorian Guard behind him. They find her in the gardens of Lucullus, a vast estate on the city's edge, filled with imported trees and endless fountains, a place where she had hosted so many of her inner circle. She is with her mother, Lepida. The older woman pleads with her daughter to act, to flee, to do anything, but Messalina seems immobilized. Some accounts claim she tried to draft a plea for mercy. Others say she simply stood there, unable to accept that it was over. That after 10 years of bending Rome to her will, Rome had finally pushed back. The soldiers arrive, she recognizes them. She has seen them in the palace, perhaps even summoned some of them to her estate before. Now they have come for her. She collapses to her knees, begging, pleading, offering her children, Octavia and Britannicus, 9 and 7 years old, as hostages, anything to survive. The soldiers remain unmoved. Orders have been given. She reaches for a dagger, perhaps her mother's, perhaps taken from a guard. Her hand trembles. She presses the blade to her throat and cannot follow through. A tribune steps forward. His name was never preserved, but his deed was. He strikes the fatal blow. Messalina Augusta, Empress of Rome, dies at 25 years old, bleeding into the grass where she once held senators in fear. Claudius orders the damnation of memory. Her statues are dragged through the streets and smashed. Her name is carved from inscriptions. Official records are altered to erase her existence. The message is clear. She never happened. Yet 2,000 years later, her story endures. You have witnessed the fall of an empress, not to war or disease, but to the consequences of unchecked power. The past refuses to stay silent. The Roman Forum still stands. The great amphitheatre still draws crowds. But the Palatine Hill, where emperors lived and where Messalina ruled, is largely reduced to ruins. Visitors walk past broken columns and crumbling walls, unaware they are standing in rooms where her influence once dominated the empire. Claudius remarried within months, taking his own niece, Agrippina the Younger, as his wife. She was more calculating, more patient. In time she would poison him and place her son Nero on the throne, beginning another cycle of instability. Messalina's children met ends nearly as tragic as her own. Her daughter Octavia was forced to marry Nero, her stepbrother, and later executed on fabricated charges at the age of 22, the same age her mother had been when she died. Her son Britannicus was poisoned at 14, likely on Nero's orders, to eliminate a rival claim. He collapsed during a dinner and died before anyone could react. The Senate acted as if Messalina had never existed, but the soldiers remembered, the servants remembered, the families remembered, whose daughters vanished into her estate and returned quiet, altered, carrying burdens they never spoke of. They remembered, and that is what lingers most uneasily about her story. How much of what we believe about Messalina is actually true? Our main sources were men, writing decades after her death, shaped by their own politics and agendas, with every reason to portray her as a villain. Roman propaganda followed a familiar script. Powerful women who unsettled male authority were almost always framed as sexually corrupt. Cleopatra, Agrippina, Livia, Messalina. The pattern never changed. That does not mean she was innocent. The marriage to Silius happened. Even sympathetic accounts accept that. The corruption was real. The machinery of blackmail existed. People who opposed her died. But the brothel tales, the competitions, the precise numbers, those blur into a grey zone where fact and exaggeration merge. We will never know exactly where truth ends and propaganda begins. What we do know is this. A 15-year-old girl was married to a man more than 3 decades her senior. She was taught that her worth lay in her purity and her ability to produce heirs. She was handed immense authority without being taught how to carry it. No guidance, no purpose beyond appearing virtuous and bearing children. And when she discovered a way to feel powerful through defiance, through control, through turning Rome's own moral double standards against itself, the same system that shaped her destroyed her, then spent 2 millennia labeling her a monster. Stand among the ruins of the Palatine today, and you can sense something heavy in the air. Not ghosts, Rome does not haunt that way, but a weight. The pressure of stories that refuse to vanish even after names were carved away, because that is the truth about the condemnation of memory. It does not succeed. Statues can be smashed, inscriptions scraped clean, records rewritten, but the lessons remain. Messalina's name was meant to disappear. Instead, it endured. Not because Rome wanted her remembered, but because truth, however distorted or buried, has a way of forcing itself back into the light. Empires have collapsed to invasions, disease, and economic ruin. Rome teaches something more subtle. They can decay from the inside. Messalina's story is not merely about sex or scandal. It is about what happens when power becomes a game, when humiliation becomes currency, when those meant to govern are too compromised to halt the rot. Every senator she degraded stayed silent. Every general she trapped remained obedient. Every witness became an accomplice. Not out of loyalty, but fear and shame, she demonstrated that control does not always require armies. Sometimes it only requires knowing what people dread having exposed. We like to believe we are different now, that we have outgrown Rome's corruption. But look at any modern state, any powerful institution. How many secrets hold it together? How many people remain silent because exposure would ruin them? How much of what we call stability is really shared complicity? Messalina does not linger in the ruins of the Palatine. She lingers anywhere power and shame coexist. A century after her death, an emperor wrote about the need to look beneath appearances, to judge things by their true nature rather than their surface. He was reflecting on leaders whose exteriors shone while their foundations decayed. He may as well have been speaking to us. Because the lesson is not that Messalina was uniquely wicked. The lesson is that Rome created her, married her off as a child, gave her power without direction, then annihilated her when she used that power in ways that exposed their own hypocrisy. Her name was erased, her story survived, and 2,000 years later, we are still grappling with what it means when those entrusted with preserving virtue become the architects of its collapse.